Hey guys, Pidot here to do an album review. Today I'm here to tell you about the latest from Korpiklaani, Jylhä, out February 5th on Nuclear Blast. This album has 13 tracks, 1 hour in length, and this the band's 11th full-length studio album. The Finnish folk metal heroes are back with an absolute majestic album. Actually, majestic is the word that comes closer to the translation of the title of the record. Unlike their previous album, this is not a concept record. This is a much different album. An album that, in my opinion, really shows a different side of the band, and it shows a little bit of everything that they can do, but just turned all the way to 11. But let's start off by talking about the structure of the record. The structure of this album is super dynamic. It changes with every single track. Every single song has its own individual way of coming together, a way of being constructed, way of being delivered, and then that really reflects on the overall feel that this album has to offer. I wouldn't go as far as to say that this is a roller coaster ride, but this is definitely an album that's going to give you a different look with every single song. You not necessarily know what's going to come around the corner, but you know it's not going to be something that you've heard before. And that's going to keep you excited, it's going to keep you on the edge of your seat, it's going to keep you engaged, and it's going to keep you glued to this album. Normally when I listen to albums like this that are this diverse, I always feel a little bit disconnected from the record because sometimes the album doesn't have the necessarily fluidity to keep you going, to keep you moving, and it feels like you're listening to just a compilation of songs and not necessarily to a full-length record. That's not the case with this album because I felt that they did it in a much different way. They approached the album, they approached the diversity of the album with a different mindset. They created a record that from a musical perspective stays very consistent. The elements that you're going to get on the first song is pretty much the elements that you're going to get throughout the whole album. So there's not much change as far as the actual construction of the tracks in terms of what you get delivered to you from a musical perspective. What changes on a track by track base is the internal mechanisms of the songs and also the emotional output that the tracks give you. The atmosphere, the vibe of the songs is very different from song to song. So they were able to change your perception of the track, they were able to change the way you feel about the song, but they didn't change everything that went into constructing that song. You're still gonna get heavy drums, heavy guitars pretty much throughout. You're gonna get a lot of consistency from the violin, from the accordion. You're gonna get a consistency approach almost from every single element. What is changing is how you feel, how you perceive, how you process these songs. Some songs are really heavy, perhaps some of the heavier tracks that Korpiklaani has done. Then there's some songs that are a little bit more just pure folk. Then you have tracks that have a little bit of reggae. Then you're gonna have songs that have a more melancholic approach, a very specific finish, almost doomy melancholic approach in how they're coming across. So you're gonna have a wide variety of experiences as you navigate through this record. But the consistency of elements coming together in order to create that feeling, in order to create that ride, is going to be exactly the same from the first track all the way down to the last track. Now, once you get into that sound, there are two elements that I really have to bring to the forefront because I felt that they played a huge role on how diverse this record sounds and how powerful and heavy the album is. And that is the drums and guitar. They have a new drummer, and what a way to get started with the band. This album is so heavy from a drums perspective. There's some songs where they take a little bit more of a subdued role, depending once again on what the atmosphere of the track is, on what the song is calling for. But overall, as you progress through this album, if there's one thing you're going to take away from it, is how heavy the drums are. The consistency of heaviness coming from the drums is present on almost every single track. Even in the songs, like I said, they're a little bit more folky, a little bit more subdued, or perhaps a little bit more doomy. Even in those songs, the drums are still playing a very important role in order to create this incredible bass line, this path that allows the track to travel upon, that allows all the different layers to come on top of it and really create consistent and songs that have a lot of volume. That's another thing that I felt that was really present on this album, and a lot of it is coming from how the drums sound, is that the songs have volume. Even in the moments where you get the accordion or the violin coming in, elements that tend to drive the sound make it a little bit more thin, a little bit more palpable. The drums are still there. The drums are still there to create this necessary wall of sound, this necessary presence to make the songs feel bigger, to make the songs feel like they're full of life, they're warmth. They have a heartbeat in them. The drums play a huge role on how this album is going to be perceived by the fans. Next, the guitars I love the guitar sound on this record. Definitely an album where they turned the guitars to 11. Not to say that they haven't had albums where the guitars played a huge role, where the guitars were heavier, but when you look at this album and when you look at what the drums are doing from the first song to the last song, and you add on top of that the heaviness that's coming out of the guitars, the consistency of heaviness that's coming out of the guitars almost on every single track, this makes this album a little bit more guitar driven. You start to pay attention more to what the guitars are doing, you start to pay attention to what they're creating, how they're pushing the sound, how they're pushing the tracks, and they're definitely one of the conductors of sound from the overall perspective of this record. And I love that. I love the bite that they have. I love the thickness of sound. I have the power, the strength. Really important role on the guitars, and pairing them up with the drums was really the KO that really knocks this out of the park as far as an album that has a lot of power, a lot of strength, a lot of sound from the first song all the way to the last. When it comes down to the vocals, Joni is very consistent. And by consistent, I don't mean that he is repetitive. I actually didn't feel like he used the same approach from the first track to the last track. I actually felt that he changed ever so slightly depending on the mood of the track. And I think that's important for an album that it's this diverse. If you have an album that has this much of a wide palette of approaches, that has this much of a wide palette of sound that's going into different directions and every song is giving you a different look, I don't know necessarily if you want to have the same approach as far as vocals are concerned. It would hold the album together, but the album's already held together by using the same elements track and track and track and track and track again. So I don't think that using the vocals from that perspective would add anything positive to the record. Perhaps it would add something negative because it would make the album feel that it's not necessarily being conducive to the mood, musically, to the mood of the tracks. So the vocals would start to feel a little bit out of place at points. So going more with where the songs are going musically, where the mood is going. If the song is a little bit darker, go with a little bit more of a darker delivery. If the song is a little bit more folky, you bring some happiness in the tone that you're delivering the song. If the track is a little bit heavier, you add some backing vocals to create some volume, to create some heaviness. That's exactly what they did throughout this record. That's exactly how Joni approached this album from a vocal perspective, and I think it's the winning formula. It is really the element that allows the album to come to life. It allows the lyrics to come to life, and that emotional baggage that the songs have, that emotional drive that's present in the atmosphere and in the vibe of the songs really comes to the forefront. It really jumps off the pages because of his very specific delivery depending on what the song was about. Overall, I really enjoy this record. To me, this is one of their best albums in the last 10 years. Definitely one of the more heavier records that they've ever released, and I have absolutely zero doubts that this is one of the most eclectic, diverse albums that they've ever put together. And the key factor for this album to work is not just how diverse it is, it's how diverse it is by using the same elements, song and song again. They didn't change what they were using, they didn't change necessarily the formula or the quantities of what they were using, they just delivered them with a different spell, with a different feel, with a different approach, and that delivery changes how you perceive the songs, changes the atmosphere of the song, changes the vibe of the song, but it doesn't change what's in the song itself, and that is the winning formula for this record. Now, as far as songs are concerned, I want to start off with Verikoira. This is the opening track. I really enjoy this song. It's a really incredible heavy track that kind of gives you a little bit of a glimpse in terms of what you can expect for the rest of the album. This is a really opening track from that perspective, because as far as drums, guitars, vocals, backing vocals, a little bit of folkiness, a little bit of heaviness, there's a little bit of everything that you're going to get throughout this record present in one single song, and that is the opening track. So what better way to discover this album with this kind of a track, a song that kind of gives you a little bit of everything that you're going to get down the line. So I love the drums on this song. Perhaps one of the elements that jumps immediately to the forefront when you're listening to this track is how heavy the drums are, and they stay pretty consistent in that heaviness almost throughout the whole track. I wouldn't say that they're there in your face every single moment, but they're so consistent, they're so heavy, and they barely ever go away that you always feel, even when they're not there, you still feel like they're exactly there in your face. The guitars also have a lot of bite, they also have a lot of strength, and they pair up perfectly with the drums, sometimes almost taking turns in terms of which one is driving the song, which one is sitting behind the wheel. When one becomes a little bit heavier, the other one takes more of a back seat. Then when the other one drops, the other one moves into the front seat. It's kind of the dynamic that you're going to get between drums and guitars as you push through this song. And I felt there was a very important dynamic mechanism that gives the song the necessary ebbs and flows to make it dynamic, to make it fluid, to move the track along. And I love that aspect of it. The vocals are very consistent in the mood that the track has. Using some backing vocals definitely added a little bit of darkness to the song. I don't think it necessarily made the track even heavier because the drums and guitars were already making sure that this was going to be a heavy track. But I felt that the backing vocals definitely added a little bit of darkness to how this track comes across. Next, Kyoto. One of my favorite songs of the album. Outside of the singles, this is definitely my favorite song of the album. I love the dark melody. It's heavy, it's folky. It has a great momentum. It has a great atmosphere. The melody is haunting at times. This is your prototypical dark, melancholic Finnish track with the folky spin in the mix. That's the best way to describe this song. You really feel that essence of Finnish melancholy present in this song, but it has a little bit more folkiness, so it has a little bit more of a bright spot here and there as you progress through it, and really does a wonderful job alternating those more melancholic moments, perhaps with a different side, with a more brighter side of what the song has to offer, and that gives you this movement, that gives you this very subtle movement as you progress through the song. It makes the song dynamic, like I said. It makes the song fluid. It makes the track move. Really important. The gloomy nature of this track is really the essence of the song itself, and one of the things that really allowed me to gravitate to it. The vocals add to that feel, so you don't have that gloominess just coming out of the music. You also have that gloominess coming out of how the vocals are being delivered. Very subtle, very hidden, very dark. And when you bring those two elements together, it makes the song feel like it's bringing the mood of the record down. And you need that on an album like this because it's very dynamic. You don't want to have all the songs push you in the same direction. You want to definitely have some darker tracks on the album, and this is definitely one of the darker tracks, but still super melodic and super vibrant at the same time. Almost the perfect example if Korpiklaani was to record a doom track, this is perhaps would be the result. Last but not least, Miero. This is an interesting song. It's one of the darker, more somber songs on the album, but it's also the one that really feels like you're listening to a ballad, a very stripped down ballad, so it has a lot of emotional content packed into a song that doesn't jump at you. It doesn't have that folky happiness vibe to it. It's completely stripped of it. The folk elements are still there, but they're there to give you a different side of that sound, to give a much darker feel, to give a more introspective feel. So this is a song that it's the most how can I say this? It's the darkest, but it's also the most stripped out of life. At the same time, most emotional track. It has all of these different things happening at once in it, and I love how it comes across. I love how subverted it is because it feels calm. It just feels absolute death when you listen to this song. The track almost feels like it's not moving, it's not going anywhere. But in that silence, in that lack of motion, and that lack of happiness, all the elements that are coming across on this track have so much of a heartbeat in it. A painful heartbeat perhaps, but a heartbeat nevertheless. So I love how this song is constructed, I love how it's delivered, and I love how the folk elements that are permeating throughout this track don't bring any light into the song whatsoever. They just accentuate the corners of darkness that this track has to offer. This is it. This is Korpiklaani with Jylhä, out February 5th on Nuclear Blast. Let me know your thoughts on the band, on the singles. Use the comment section below. I'll be reading those and getting back to you. Take care, guys.